Yeah, please give them a round of applause. This is pretty exciting.
Where are we sitting?
Sit in the middle here. Wow. So I'm sure you're all aware of who the gentlemen on stage are, and it's incredible to get them on a panel together. Both of them, of course, were cited in the Bitcoin white paper, and the technologies that both of them invented were pivotal. They were instrumental in Bitcoin's success. So this panel, we're going to be discussing why that's so. We're going to talk a little bit about that technology and how far Bitcoin has come in the last 10 years. So, of course, we have Scott Stornetta to my left. He is Chief Scientist at Yugen Partners. He is the inventor of early blockchain tech, and he has 4 out of the 8 citations in the white paper. And we have Adam Back. He's the CEO of Blockstream, and he invented HashCash, which is the hub of the incentive structure in Bitcoin, and without which Bitcoin could not have been possible at all. So welcome, and I'm really delighted to chat with you. Let's talk a little bit. Let's start with just talking through this technology, and I'll start with you, Scott. Talking about you and your partnership with Stuart Haber and how you developed blockchain tech.
Well, again, I'm happy to take credit for being co-inventor of the early or proto-blockchain. I wouldn't want to say I'm an inventor of blockchain because it's come to mean a lot more things. So I had just left Stanford and got my first job at part of the old Bell Labs, Bellcore. Stuart was 2 years ahead of me, so he was the person that I was intimidated by. And I went to Stuart and said, I don't really know anything about crypto, but there's a big problem that needs to be solved. Namely, we're going to not be able to know the difference between an old bit and a new bit. And all of the world's records is going to be written in bits. And that's going to create a crisis of credibility. What we need to do is find a way to create immutable records. And if we can get a jump on it before the smart people realize that this is a big problem, then we can, maybe get some papers published. And so that was really our motivation. And I've spoken about this before, so I'll try to just make a long story short. For us, the key moment was when we were trying to find a way to do a system that didn't require you to trust a central authority. And we banged our heads on that for a long time. We felt we had a practical system, but it wasn't an elegant system. Finally, Stuart said, Scott, I don't think we're going to solve this problem, and I'd still like to get a publication out of it. So why don't we prove that it's impossible to build an immutable record without trusting someone? And it was really in the course of writing out the proof that it couldn't be done that the idea emerged that it actually could be done. So I think that's all the story I'm going to say.
That's pretty exciting, and I've talked to you in the past about your involvement in Bitcoin, whether or not Satoshi Nakamoto reached out to you. You decided not to talk about that with me prior, and I presume it's the same thing here, but it's undeniable that the blockchain tech was instrumental in Bitcoin, but of course it couldn't have happened without HashCash. So
absolutely
Adam,
not.
Yeah, Adam, let's talk a little bit about that and your invention, which is right at the heart of Bitcoin, the proof of work system.
Okay, so I was aware of timestamping, the concept which predates much of the technology that Bitcoin uses.
And we can now prove that it predates.
Yeah, there you go. So not only do you can prove that's the case. So now HashCash was born out of sort of a reaction to a spam problem, particularly a spam problem through anonymous remailers. So I was one of the people operating anonymous remailer to allow people to communicate with privacy and to achieve freedom of association and freedom of speech in email and Usenet discussion forums. And one of the things that you tended to see is that some people would spam through the remailer, and probably, the spam wasn't content, it was like random numbers and just trying to create a nuisance. So we suspected it was an attempt to discredit the remailers or annoy people so that they would call for the remailers to be blocked or censored in some way. So it got me thinking about what can we do to reduce the spam problem. And typically what people do when they see spam is they think, okay, I will block the sender or I will block the IP address. And that's the typical sort of system administrator approach. But because it's anonymous, we intentionally don't know who the sender is, so we can't block them. And anyway, that's a kind of obnoxious thing to do. So it got me to thinking, well, what is the, to start from scratch and think again, what is the actual underlying problem? And the underlying problem is that email is free. And so then I started thinking, well, how can we introduce a cost? So at the time, there was no PayPal, but there were merchant processors for credit cards. But then you have a problem, which is not everybody has a credit card. It was then quite difficult to get a credit card merchant processing account, and it would provide you with no privacy if you did pay with a credit card, like to buy some credits, to send a fraction of a penny per email. So then I was looking at hash collisions for the cryptography about how much work it would be to find a full hash collision on something like SHA-1 at the time. And it's phenomenally expensive, like almost impossible. But if, hypothetically, somebody found one, anybody could instantly verify it and be convinced that indeed somebody had found a collision. And so those two problems kind of came together, and I was thinking, well, that is a kind of solution, but it's too hard. So can I intentionally weaken it so that we can have a tunably difficult proof that I did some work? Right. And that's indeed possible, so that's where HashCash came from. Like
a weakened live virus.
Yeah.
Still has effectiveness, but it doesn't kill.
Right.
So I mean, that became a way to throttle spam through remailers and got used for a number of different things in anti-denial of service types of things. And actually, very early, within days of releasing the source code for it and describing it, people were observing that it's something interesting, because there are a lot of people on the cypherpunks and crypto lists interested in electronic cash who were very excited about the previous system by David Chaum, DigiCash, which had kind of failed because it was centralized, basically. There's a central database, the company operating it went bankrupt, the database went offline, the equipment probably got sold for scrap, and now anybody who had coins had no idea to know whether they're spent or not. And so that experience led people to think, well, we need a decentralized solution. And the other problem is you needed a relationship with a bank to buy coins. And that's another problem, because now you have to ask for permission, and maybe the bank doesn't want to give it to you. So it kind of caused a lot of ideas to come together, and people were thinking that you could use the HashCash as a mining protocol to mine coins. And then it got a little bit hazy about how you would control inflation in the environment. People were thinking, oh no, it's going to be hyperinflationary. And so Nick Szabo and Wei Dai and other people were trying to brainstorm about ideas to control that. And so I think really that's, Bitcoin picked up where those things and PoW, which was another Hal Finney idea, left off. So those were in 98, and PoW was in 2004. That's Hal Finney's more centralized system. So it seems like Satoshi had solved that remaining problem, which is to make a completely free from human judgment sort of feedback loop to solve inflation, not by solving price inflation, but by fixing the supply curve and letting the market decide. So that was a kind of intuition or combined thought that nobody managed to figure out before, basically.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned some of the precursors to Bitcoin, and there were a lot of digital monies that came out, and as you said, a lot of them were centralized and they were shut down, or they just didn't get the network effect because people realized they were centralized and could be shut down. And then Bitcoin came along and solved those issues. I mean, you guys would have heard about Bitcoin right from the start because your names are written there, so people would have reached out to you. What was your initial reaction when you read it and you saw what Satoshi had created?
So I mean, for myself, actually, Hal Finney was somebody who liked to tinker with things and try things out. So he installed it and tried it out, and famously did the first Bitcoin transaction, or received the first Bitcoin transaction, and wrote a kind of experiment report about how it worked and what worked well and what didn't, and that kind of thing. So I read that. It was the first thing I read, and then a paper later And so because I came from the kind of applied cryptography background of the previous electronic cash systems like Tron, they have extremely strong privacy and extremely strong security advantage for the holder if you trust the central server, which is a big if. So Bitcoin does something quite different, which is it's distributed. The privacy is actually quite weak compared to those previous systems. So that's one criticism. It's like, oh, it's not very private or cryptographically fungible. And then the other thing is the security advantage of the defender versus the attacker is kind of 50-50. It's like who has more hash rate kind of thing, where people were used to, with hash functions and digital signatures, like 2 to the 128 advantage for the defender or something. So, those things take some philosophical adjustment because it's a different kind of security model, but it has the advantage that it's decentralized and people can join and leave, so it's not vulnerable to a single point of failure server shutdown. And that's the key difference. So I got interested in improving the privacy technologies. That's where I proposed things like confidential transactions to try and say, okay, this system is deployed, doesn't have very good privacy properties, but maybe we can improve that. And there's certainly a lot of interest in the Bitcoin ecosystem to incrementally improve Bitcoin's privacy. So Schnorr signatures do some of that, and Lightning Layer does some of that. And so typically in each Bitcoin release or protocol, there's some incremental improvement in those areas.
Right. Scott.
Yeah, well, I would just pick up where he left off. I would start by just saying that I was very influenced by David Chaum and what he was trying to achieve. I really feel like he was the one, to me, more than anyone, that created the zeitgeist for creating things like Bitcoin. And so when I first read the Bitcoin paper, my reaction was, I was all excited about the David Chaum cash aspect, the privacy that cash implied, and I said, there's no privacy at all here. Suggesting that we just change our signatures each time we transact, what you've got is a completely traceable record of what's going on. So I was a little bit, quite frankly, disappointed to see that. But I wanted to come back to the whole HashCash thing, because from my perspective, that was the catalyst that was needed. Stuart and I spent years recognizing that there had to be the right incentives amongst the different players to get this thing off the ground. And when I first read about the mining, I thought, whoa, that's like we were thinking of fly swatters, and this is like a cannon. This is like super incentive, and to us it seemed maybe even overkill, but it's clearly what was needed to get the party started. And so I really appreciate what Satoshi did to make use of the HashCash idea to create the mining. It's easy to see in hindsight that huge incentives were needed to kickstart this thing. And I think still today a lot about the original problem that you're trying to solve, the spam and the I'm not a robot issues, and that's been a very fruitful avenue for me, so I owe you that as well. But yeah, I guess the other part of the story about when I first read the Bitcoin paper, it's how I read it. It's that I'd been on the different mailing lists, but had kind of dropped off years before. And as I've told the story before, I started getting these unsolicited emails and regular US postal mails from people that I didn't know saying, gee, I see all these footnotes in the Bitcoin paper to you, and I also Googled you online, and I see that you speak Japanese, and so I was just wondering. And of course, I always tell people the same thing. I try to make that very clear. Watashi wa Satoshi de wa arimasen. Demo Satoshi dattara sore o kokaku suru to omoimasu ka? I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to say it any more clearly than that. So.
No, that's well said. So looking at Looking at the last 10 years, we've seen Bitcoin really evolve, and from the moment where you guys first found out about this technology, you first read the white paper, you first saw it in action, and then seeing it evolve over the last 10 years, did you ever expect that we'd get to a place where it would become a household name, where it would become as popular as it is today? I just want to hear your thoughts about that. Adam, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, for people who were around and interested in electronic cash at the time that DigiCash was the hot startup, that was actually a pretty exciting time, right? There was a real prospect that DigiCash was going to secure deals with banks where you'd be able to transfer fiat currency into it and out of it, and it looked like the banks were willing to sign the deal because it was a very hot technology and would provide electronic cash on the internet as an alternative to credit card payments. And but anyway, for whatever kind of business reasons, and maybe the market environment at the time, that company went bankrupt. But before that happened, there was certainly an enormous amount of excitement, kind of Bitcoin-like, but on a smaller scale, with less people aware of it. But for the people that were aware of it, they were always very excited to see an electronic cash system become live and available on the internet. And part of the interest was because you could do other things privately on the internet, like browse the web using Tor and things, precursors to Tor, and exchange email anonymously and things like that, but you couldn't transact privately. And so people were interested to see that missing part of the privacy picture get deployed. There are a lot of people from a technical background who are very interested in reading any kind of applied crypto paper on electronic cash, and there are lots of variants after Chalmers. A former colleague and friend, Stefan Brands, he has a slightly more efficient electronic cash protocol, and he was David Chalmers' PhD student, actually. So there was a lot of interest in seeing that. So yeah, I mean, Bitcoin has grown much larger, and it feels kind of like a return to that time, but on a much bigger scale. So for people who were interested in that, it's very positive that it's come to be finally, because it feels like it was nearly going to happen and then it went away. Mm-hmm. And I had this long period where nothing really happened in terms of electronic cash development.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. Scott, how about you?
So the 10 years of development, did I think it would get as big? It got big faster than I thought it would happen. I think part of my ego prevents me from thinking that I always knew that what Stuart and I had done was going to eventually be universal. And so maybe that's just egotistical, but I never thought it would go the way and the speed that it's gone. I remember a very vivid moment in my own life when one of my sons sent me this poster. What do you call these things where they show all the different logos of the companies that are working in a space?
Like a step and repeat type thing?
I don't know. I think there's some...
Like that one right there?
Some sort of word for it. But anyway, he sends me this poster that's this big, and it shows these 200 companies that are operating in sort of the blockchain writ large space. And I just remember just kind of feeling like, wow, no, I'd never seen it going like that. Yeah, so
must be
it was
pretty gratifying.
kind of humble. Gratifying isn't really the word. It's where you just kind of feel very, very small, very humble, thinking that there's that much talent and that many people working in a space where you had a hand in getting it started.
That's really, really cool. So let's now look forward to the next 10 years, just as we close up here. Both of you, I believe, come from different perspectives on this, so I'm very interested to discuss where you think Bitcoin is going. Adam, you're very much into building out Bitcoin's future, and Scott, I mean, you're very open-minded about the idea of multiple currencies coexisting. So I'd love to just kind of delve into that a little bit. Scott, did you want to start this time?
Sure. I guess the first thing I'd say is just to offer an anecdote. I'm getting mic'd up back behind the stage, and the guy says to me, he says, you're the only guy that's worn a tie at this thing. And I said, don't worry, I have a jacket as well. And the reason I say that is, you know, here I am, a private equity investor in the blockchain space, and a lot of you may initially assume that that means that I've sort of gone over to the dark side. But let me just state unequivocally that I am a fundamental believer in the ability of these technologies, basically the cryptographic technologies writ large, to level the playing field and to create, you know, I'm not a crypto anarchist, but I certainly am a crypto libertarian, and I think we are going to get to the world that we want and that we deserve. We just need to find a path that leads from A to B. So I'm extremely bullish about the next 10 years. I understand your question was about, is it Bitcoin uber alles, or is it
You can answer however
Bitcoin,
way you want.
I just think we're going to see such a flourishing and diversification of things. I think there's plenty of, I guess you don't say gas in the tank when you're not talking about Ethereum, but I think there's plenty of potential for Bitcoin to kind of work out the issues that you're talking about. But there's potential for other things. I think we're going to see a real flourishing. And it doesn't all just have to be about money, of course. You know, I'm a big fan of the distributed ledger and how that can create quantization and tokenization of assets. And I think that's the requisite layer for smart contracts to even start to play and come in a big way. But I just think we're going to see such a broadening and diversification of this. But do I believe in that sort of libertarian dream? Absolutely. I mean, I was going to wear my Celsius t-shirt, but then I thought it didn't go with my shoes, so back to
tie.
Back to the suit and the tie. But inside this suit and tie is the heart of someone that believes in a peer-to-peer world, and I think we're going to get there.
Nice. Yeah. Adam, what are your predictions, and where do you see Bitcoin going in the next 10 years?
Well, I mean, I think Bitcoin has come much further and much faster than people expected. So, you know, there was a saying in the early .com era about internet time, and there's Bitcoin time, and it seems to be even faster, like Inception or something, like it's running even faster. So it's pretty challenging to even keep up with the pace of new things that are being developed, new ideas and implementations of them. You know, even for a technical person to keep up with the stream of discussions about new ideas. And it seems like there's still areas for innovation that haven't been realized, because it's, you know, blockchain and bearer electronic cash is a whole new sort of building block, and it has implications, you know, with the smart contracts. And basically, it's sort of like picking up a new programming language with a new paradigm, and it takes a while for people to natively understand it and reach the conclusion of what kinds of things you could build with it. And so, you know, people have, I mean, the Lightning discovery is like fairly recent, and there's an enormous amount of energy and development around that from many implementations and applications and adoption. But I think there are other things like that. You know, it's very recently that somebody proposed state chains, which is another kind of variant of a unilaterally withdrawable sidechain-like thing. And it seems like there's some additional insight and benefit there, that you can take your funds out, so there's less implied trust in the operators of a federated chain of some kind. It makes some different trade-offs, but you know, it strikes me that there are still major discoveries about the implications of a tech being found, so we're still, you know, at early stages for what can be built. So I think it does provide a sort of programming model for electronic cash, and it's surprising the number of things you can build in layers above it that retain interesting properties of what's beneath. So, and I mean, in terms of coins, I tend to view it as sort of like TCP/IP, that there's one interoperable standard, and it's kind of a lingua franca for exchanging value. And if any kind of innovation can be adopted in layers, or ultimately, you know, people can import Bitcoin's UTXO set into some other data structure if a new and innovative data structure is found. So that's my kind of view of the single coin approach.
Absolutely. Well, Bitcoin has stood on the shoulders of giants. It brought together some incredible tech that already existed, but brought it together in a magical way. Two of the giants are right here on stage. Can you please give one final thank you to these gentlemen?
If they haven't cut off the mic, I'm just going to say one last thing, and that is dream big, dream radical, but you got to find an incremental way to get there, because you're going to run out of money otherwise.
Well said. Thank you.
What's up? Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Cheers, Adam. Whoa. Heavyweights.